Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Elfrink, head of marketing over here at Empire Flippers. And today we have a returning guest, Ace Chapman. So I interviewed Ace a couple weeks back, might be 3 or 4 episodes ago by the time you're listening to this. But I knew there was just absolutely no way I was going to get through my litany of questions I had for Ace. I felt like I needed to introduce him first to you guys so you kind of get his backstory, but I also really wanted to talk about all the cool stuff he's doing with private funds and fundraising and all that kind of stuff, where he's really leveled up this whole business buying game to a whole new level, to the point where in this interview, in the second interview, there's a part where Ace says like buying a business is just kind of like not even the focus of the fund in a lot of ways. It's about creating assets of value using businesses that just didn't exist before. And we get into that. It's a bit more of a nuanced kind of concept. So we talk about this a few different times. If this is the first time you ever heard of it, you might be more familiar with the term, say, like creative monetization, where you're thinking of like all sorts of ways you can slice the pie, like say an affiliate site. Instead of just being an affiliate, maybe you create your own digital product that leads into your affiliate offers, all that kind of stuff. So Ace and I get into it, a lot more nitty gritty stuff. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know, leave us a message, and please share it with your friends. All right, with that said, enough of me talking. Let's get into this awesome episode with Ace. All right, I got Ace with me back in the hot seat over here. I was telling you offline, I knew there was zero chance I was going to be able to get through my questions in that first interview because you just had so much stories and experience. So Ace, welcome back. Thank you for coming back. I'm sure my audience appreciates it. How you doing, man?
I am excellent. I'm happy to be back. It was a great, I think it's a big difference. And sometimes I go on interviews, and for a while, I just stopped doing interviews. So I took about 3 years off of doing any interviews. But of course, when you guys hit me up, it's always like, all right, let's connect. But it's been years. It's been a long time since I was on with y'all. But the thing that I like is when I'm talking to people that are in this space every day. So if you're in micro private equity, if you're in acquisitions, if you're working on these small deals, the types of questions that you get into are just a lot more interesting. Like I've got 100 interviews literally out there that people can go and search with the typical question of like, oh, why is buying a business better than starting one from scratch? So I don't want to answer that ever again. So, I love this because, even last time we're able to get into some of the deep strategy stuff. And then today we're going to be able to go even deeper. And, I try to stay innovative after 20 years of being in the space. And so it's more fun for me to talk about kind of the things that we're finding as we're actually doing deals rather than some of the more philosophical and high level, like, what's the first step to due diligence types of questions.
Well, you're going to love this next question then. Tell me, what is the first steps for due diligence?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the
What
kind of
do I
deep,
do
in-depth
due
questioning you've
diligence?
come to
Man, you're
expect.
gonna have to look it up on the internet, man. It's out there.
Well,
Actually, it's probably on Web Equity Show, one of our joint podcasts.
we'll link to
Actually,
that
we did a whole
podcast.
season. I think we did a whole
Yeah,
season on due diligence.
that's still some of the best structured content out there as in our space. I feel the web equity season. So we'll link to that in the show notes below. But yeah, man, I'm excited that you're back because we ended the last interview talking about joint ventures. I know that's a lot of what you do. You do all these wheeling and dealing. You have all these partnerships, all these different unique structures. So let's get right into it because we have a lot to discuss today too. I'm sure the audience is interested. So tell me a bit about the hidden benefits of these joint ventures. Like, what are they? You hinted at them a little bit in the last episode.
Yeah. So one of the things that I am a very big believer in is just the idea that everything you want, somebody else already has. And so all deal making is, all deal structuring is, buying businesses is literally that, if you're buying a business at the very foundation of buying that business is you want a certain income for 90% of people, because most people aren't doing like strategic deals in this space.
Mhm.
But even when it's a strategic deal, it's still the same thing. they've got customers that you want, they have talent that you want, they have technology, whatever that thing is. But let's just talk about the income. So when you're buying that business, I have a job, I'm making 100,000. I want to leave this job. I still want to make 100,000. This business is making that amount. I hate my job. I'm going to buy this business, be able to leave my job and make that income. And so, what that person has done is all of the work and risk and late nights and stress and all that to get to that level. So, really, what you're buying is that you're not really buying the income. You're paying them for the fact that they, number one, played the lottery, which is they took a risk and they did it this, you think of it like a race. So, you got 100 people that are running this race. You're able to get the winner at the finish line. So they made it to the finish line. They won. All the other ones lost all their money that they put in. They, lost the time, the stressful nights, all those things, time away from their family. They made the sacrifice and ended up with zero. And so you're basically buying that winning lottery ticket. And the beautiful thing is that when you look at that foundation of everything we're doing is because somebody else has what we want or they've done the work to build what we want, that's at the foundation of doing joint ventures. So when I'm like, it's part of it is business growth. So I'm very, very rarely ever spending money on advertising. So at the foundational level, because there's just so many of these, and I'll give some examples on the joint venture. But like one example, literally, is I'll give a client example where I've got a client, they were spending $40,000 a month on ads. And anytime I meet somebody that's spending, that much on ads, it pains my heart because it's basically like somebody who is paying, $40,000 in rent. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, if you're getting a great deal on rent and maybe you're in and out of the place, it's just like that is one of the things I love is that there is the new case that renting is better than buying a house. And so this paying for ads is kind of the same thing where if you are in a situation where you're moving every 6 months and you're kind of nomading or you're finding really great deals and just paying a low amount of space, but when you're paying a ton and you're living in the same house, it doesn't make sense to rent. If you're paying $40,000 and you're doing that month after month, you have no plans to leave, you don't, you're going to be here forever. We need to figure out a way for you to buy instead of renting. And so, what that means is right now, if you're spending money on ads, you're paying Facebook rent to get in front of the eyeballs that they have. And then you'll get a few people that become buyers. And then next month, you got to rent access to eyeballs again. And then at any point, they're the owners, just like the owners of the house. Then they come in and they say, hey, we want to do some paint. We're going to paint it this color. You're like, I don't like that color. It's like, well, we do. If you don't, you're going to have to leave. When you decide, man, I'd really love to build a patio out here and have a pool, and you call up the owner, they're like, nope, can't do it. We don't want that there. And so the problem with renting access to those eyeballs from Facebook is that they are in control. They own your business. They run your business. They decide if you're going to make money or not. And that is a nightmare of a situation. We see it every day. You guys see it every day where you're looking at deals or deals are listed and something changes. And now all of a sudden their whole business crashes. So that's what happens when you're a renter. So my goal is always transforming people into being either partners or owners. And so when I'm looking at joint ventures, I want to figure out who has my audience and the same audience that I want to get access to through Facebook. And when you're building out your target audience, you can build out that same target audience and figure out the media that has those and figure out ways to get ownership in those or at least structure partnerships where it's a more of a long-term solution. And now you're not just renting every month. So we had a case where we did this with the folks that were they're kind of in the coaching space, and they're spending 40,000 a month, and we found them a few groups within Facebook, so it's like literally the same people. We started off with a joint venture just to see, okay, is this going to convert? And we can go into details if you want, but bottom line is the joint venture turned into an equity deal, which turned into them buying the whole thing. And so in some cases, the joint venture is just an intro into being able to buy the business. In other cases, just, hey, we want to replace this expense that we have with marketing. But that's an online deal. But the cool thing about this, when I think about just thinking about the world this way, is I've used this in my personal life where just recently, like an idiot, as you know, I've been traveling the world for a really long time, had come back to the US during COVID, and it had a bunch of stuff. So I put it into storage and was paying $500 a month for, 2, 3 years once I left. And, so literally like 15, 16, $17,000 just gone because I kept thinking, okay, I'm going to sell this stuff. I'm going to do something with it. And, I was basically instead ended up doing a deal with someone who was building out. I got a friend that has a course on with Airbnb. I'm like, hey, I need somebody that is in Atlanta that needs to build out their Airbnb. And I basically did a joint venture deal with them where I gave them everything because it was basically everything you need to fill a house. So all the furniture, everything, the kitchen stuff, everything you need. And so we basically structured a deal where they don't even own the furniture, but we're joint ventures in this house. I provide the furniture, they have the house, and I get a percentage of that income. And so that is a little bit of the thinking where, it's kind of layers to where all I'm like, you're literally, in the case of that, and that's why I wanted to give these two examples. But in the case of the Facebook marketing example, they literally took a $40,000 expense and they turned it into a joint venture that then turned into equity. And so they literally turned it from an expense to an asset and something that they own. In that same vein, we're also using marketing dollars to just buy Instagram account and other posts. That's still way, way better. But we're talking about joint ventures, so I'm trying to keep it on that. So when it comes to joint ventures, even in your personal life, like now I turned an expense where it spent, unfortunately 5 figures on a storage place. And now I'm getting monthly income just by negotiating a joint venture.
That's awesome, man. Just so people who may not have followed the initial part of that is basically like marketing through acquisition or like, scaling your business through acquisition. I think a lot of
Yeah,
people make it's not a mistake because it's right, but I think a lot of people think when you buy a business, like you said, you're buying an income, right? But there's so many deeper nuances. Like if we bought a group, an association dedicated to digital entrepreneurship, that obviously has a big boon for empire flippers, right? When it comes to buying and
exactly.
selling, even if that group itself may not produce any revenue. I've actually been looking at one group trying to get a guy, if anyone in the audience knows him, I think the group is called Digital Nomads Around the World, has like tens of
Yeah,
thousands of people in there. So I reached out to who I think is the owner, but he ghosted me. But obviously that group like doesn't make any money. It's just like a group of communal digital nomads. But for us, it could be quite a lucrative community, right? Something we've always wanted to do, which we're not very good at, is building a community. So
yeah.
that's another thing. It's kind of like a cheat code. You like, oh, I'm not very good at this community. Well, why don't you just buy one that is already good, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is the key. So you could go in and acquire it, or you could just do joint ventures. And, I think even if you're doing an offline deal. Like an example for me, one of my early ones was, I had a spa and we did a joint venture with a hair salon, and basically just said, hey, we'll send people to you, you send people to us. Here's this card, you can give them, and we treated it like it was a gift. So, it's like, hey, you're one of my favorite customers. I have this thing. You can go over here and get this free tanning session. And so they gave it like it was a gift card, which gives it a little bit more value. But thinking creatively like that, I think, is one of the biggest benefits. We've done similar things with locksmiths and bookkeepers where we get a business and then we're growing it with this concept of joint ventures.
In your mind, is there a big difference between, say, a joint venture and what our crowd would probably be more familiar with, like an affiliate program, referral program? Are they structured differently in your view, or are they
Yeah,
basically the same?
that is a really great question. And I think the way that I see the joint venture is that it's more permanent. I'm glad you asked that question. And so you look at something like the locksmith example. It's not just that while you could start as an affiliate, it's not just that you're saying, okay, we're going to give you this affiliate fee or we're going to get an affiliate fee. It's more that, hey, we're going to be partners, we're going to work together, and this is how this is going to be structured. So, like in that example, we basically turned a locksmith business into an internet business. The locksmith wanted to sell the business. He was down in Dalton, Georgia, and I only spoke to him because I had a friend that was friends with him from Chattanooga. And he's like, hey, like he really wants to sell his business. I'm like, dude, I can't do anything with locksmith. It's one person, he
This
has
is my
one
passion. I've
van.
always wanted to do this.
Yeah, yeah, like I can't, there's nothing I can do with them. But I spoke to him and I'm really glad I did because that opened my eyes to like, hey, there's always something very creative to be done. The limit isn't the deal. The limit is always your creativity. I'm a very big believer in that. And one of the reasons was from this deal a few years back. So we did a deal with them where it's like, all right, the only thing that is tremendous value that I could use is that he was ranked number one and for that
On
city. So
Google,
he was
yeah.
getting a ton of leads. And, we didn't really want the van or any of that stuff, but we made a deal with them that they said, hey, we will take over your listing. We'll take the business that comes in and we're going to pay you a percentage of whatever deals we make. And obviously, like I said, I didn't want to do that work. And so we had a little bit of kind of like, what's a joint venture over here? Because that's just a permanent thing. It's like, we're going to take your business and we're going to give you basically kind of a earn out based on what we earn. Now we need somebody to go and do the work. And so basically went to the third page of the search. It was probably it's just 2 pages for that small town, but went to the bottom of that young guy getting started. They said, hey, if we send you leads, will you give us this percentage of those leads? And so we basically just connected those two and, basically had kind of this business that was just a virtual business. At the end of the day, we didn't have to have that location. So I get how people want to put it in the affiliate box, but I think that by putting it in that affiliate box, you don't get the full creativity of what's possible.
I agree. I agree with that. For example, the one you just described there, where you're giving these leads over to the other locksmith owner, and you have this joint venture where is whatever job they do, they kick back a percentage. The actual logistics of doing that, I think that's one thing that people struggle with. Like, okay, this revenue sharing deal, more or less, is what it is, right?
Yep.
You send the leads over. How do I know that person is going to like pay me, right? like actually
Mhm.
trustworthy? So is there anything like in your experience that has helped make that logistics like more of a transparent process? Because I think a lot of people look at that as like kind of a black box. They're not quite sure like who's going to trust each other first.
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be different in every case. I mean, I can specifically give in that case. So we literally had a call center where those calls were coming into. So it was forwarded from his same number. We took over his number. It was forwarded into a call center. That call center took the call, so we knew, all right, this is a real person. Blah blah blah. They forwarded to the person that was really providing that service, and the person that provided the service could lie, but we're able to call and do like, hey, how did the service go? Which we do want to do. So randomly we can do that. And then that person basically has the thread of, man, if you want to keep getting these leads, don't bite the hand that's feeding you. So every
Yeah.
you're just looking at, again, I think the limit is more creativity rather than, oh, you can't do this. But I think that's what stops most people from doing it. Most people are doing is like, oh, well, you got to trust this guy over here. And what if this guy screws you over here, da, 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 as opposed to trying to think through, okay, how could I manage that? Because, it's just a matter of the brain. Like, are you going to use your brain to come up with problems? Or are you going to use your brain to come up with solutions? Those are the only two options.
Yeah, I bet someone in the audience is thinking like, "Oh my god, he set up a call center to do this." Like, I don't know if you did this or not, but this is just like I think a good thing to tell
Yeah,
the audience. Like, anytime there's something like that, there is almost for sure a white label solution out there that's like a out of the
yeah,
box call center for you that you can like plug in or whatever service. I saw this.
yeah.
There's this podcast editor. He runs a great cheap service, white label podcast editing, and a lot of the editors are charging like 3, 4x. They're just using him. Like
I love it. I
you
love it.
so they have like better positioning, right, to charge like much more money than what he's charging,
Yeah,
but then they just fulfill the service through him. So it's like a
that's
similar thing.
great.
There's always a like out of the box solution usually. So you don't have to like
Exactly,
actually go and
exactly.
like let's build my own call center, my like my own foundation, like brick by brick. That's cool, man. I wanted to talk a bit about what you're doing lately with private equity. So we didn't get into that too much in the last episode, other than
Yeah.
that you're doing it. So talk to me about what you've been up to in the fundraising space. Like what's going on in the world of Ace there?
Yeah, so, I am a really big fan of just of investing like the wealthy. You know what I mean? Like whether you're in business, whatever, like everything is investing your time. So you're investing your money, you're investing your time into a business. If you're investing your time into a startup, I don't think that that makes a lot of sense because of the numbers. Now, if you're doing it like quote unquote the wealthy do it, and you're in a startup and you're going to Silicon Valley and you're going to raise $20 million for that startup and do it in a big way, then that is the way to play the startup game. But if you're going to buy businesses, then I think you should buy it and do it the way that the biggest people do it. So when it comes to private equity, when it comes to just buying, that's all but private equity is. It's just when it comes to buying businesses and you break down, okay, well, how are the very biggest people, in the world, how are they buying businesses? It's through private equity funds. And so, I ended up being dragged into starting a fund years ago. I did not want to start a fund. It didn't make sense to me. I felt like somebody, it's like, hey, like you should start this fund. And you know how you're getting all the money now? Well, if you start this fund, you can give some of the other people money, some other people money as well. It's like, well, wait a minute.
Sounds
I don't
great.
know. Yeah, yeah. Like this sounds terrible. And so, there's just all of these benefits that came. So I got dragged into it. I did not want to start a fund. I had somebody that was basically like, well, let's just try it out with the small fund. And it was one of those things where once I got into it, it's like, oh, this is why all of the wealthy people do it through a private equity fund. And you could take something as simple as like the tax benefits. When you're in a fund structure, you have all of these beneficial tax treatments. So, if you're just out there and you're doing a deal on your own, you're going to pay more money on a percentage basis than the billionaire who's doing it through a fund. And they're making way more money than you.
Is that just because of a
So,
different, I don't know, tax class or category? Like, how do they get better benefits with private equity funds?
great question. It's specifically for the fund managers. So, if you're a fund manager, you get what's called carried interest.
Hmm.
And that's basically a share of the fund's profits. Now, there's a lot of ways to structure how you're making that from the fund, but whatever you get from it is going to be considered carried interest. Now, this is saving so many billions of dollars in taxes that it literally comes up on a regular basis on the Congress floor. It's like, hey, we got to close this loophole. But luckily, we're in good hands with the billionaires that are already playing this game that are paying lobbyists for my benefit because I don't have any lobbyists, but I can trust in those guys that they're going to pay
You're
good money.
outsourcing it, just like the call center,
I'm out.
outsourcing it
Exactly.
to
So that's the watershed benefit when you do things the right way. Like you just can follow what they're doing and they're going to take care of it. So you're getting this carried interest. And typically with carried interest, you're going to be taxed as a long-term capital gains rate. So that's the lowest rate. So somebody else, if you compare somebody else who's doing the exact same deal as me, and they've got a business that is, generating the same amount of money, they're going to pay a ordinary income tax rate, which no matter where they are, that changes based on the total income, but it's going to be higher than my long-term capital gains. And that, I think, one of the other things that most small entrepreneurs take for granted is the long-term impact of taxes. But I digress. So the other thing that was a paradigm shift for me was the fact that I had done all of these deals. And besides me kind of telling people about the deal, and I could show kind of some financial records, there wasn't a real report card. And as you get into wealthier circles, and especially in the fund circle, you realize that you're not using a credit report to get access to money. What you're using, or what you want to be able to use, is your track record. And that track record is built through a fund. So when you get your audits of the fund and they say, hey, this person has generated this amount of return in this fund, now when you go and you show that to other people, it's like, oh, they open up the checkbook and you're able to raise that capital. So I'd had all of this history that was like great stories. I get to come on and tell Greg about, oh, I did this deal, and me and Joe are talking about deals that I did with y'all. And like, I've got the history for people that know, but this now puts me in a different category. And then the final thing was the fact that you now get open to the very best deals. When it comes to, like, I don't really talk, and I miss out on kind of growth and being this big influencer in the space, but I stopped talking about no money down deals because those aren't the best deals. I would rather do the work to get access to capital to buy the very best businesses. As like, y'all aren't doing deals, selling these deals where somebody's just doing these no money down things. Like, people are the very best businesses. People are coming up with the cash. And so you can either be at a disadvantage because the people that are doing the work to raise capital, when they come to the table, they're taking the very best deals off the top.
Yeah,
And
because they're
so
actually
you're
paying the money, right? And that's what the sellers
just paying
want.
the
So,
money.
of course, they get the
Yeah,
best deals.
they get the best deals. But those are the deals that are going to have tremendous growth, that you're going to be able to come in and they're not going to be as risky. And so you have people, and I'm telling you, man, it's just because people reach out to me all the time. And, I have people that reach out to me that we both know, but they have done deals on businesses, and then something changes or something has an impact, but they were really excited to do the deals. Like, oh man, I paid so little down, and it's gonna be so awesome, my ROI, da da da. And then, 6 months later, something happens and it goes to zero. It's like, oh yeah, so now that ROI is negative. Like, you lost money because you didn't even get the little bit that you did put down back. So when
Yeah,
you're trying to do the really creative stuff, like, I am still creative, but I'm coming to the table as somebody who, like, hey, I've got this amount of cash. So now I can still be really creative with the structure of the deal and how I'm going to release the cash, but just being able to show them, listen, I have the cash, is a really big deal. And being able to say, okay, we just do a lot of creative deal structures, even with that cash, that protect us. But I think there are too many people that are running around trying to do that really creative thing. And then it also puts you above the fray. But at the very least, we're already in a space that has amazing ROI. So you're just buying the average deal, you're talking 35, 40% ROI without any creative thing. And so I want to get the top 1% of deals. And in order to do that, having a fund puts me at an advantage to be able to close those deals and not have to be put into the category of these folks that are trying to get the no money down deals.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize, like, the more creative the deal structure, at least in the no money down circle, the less margin for error you have. And there's always errors that are going to happen in business. I mean, that's the nature of business. That it's risky, right? So I think people don't appreciate that, especially when they're brand new. Maybe they haven't ran a business. They just think like, oh, this website that is like been crushed by Google is a great deal. But then they also don't know how to fix the Google penalties. So it's actually a terrible deal for them, stuff like that. So
Exactly.
it's something we see quite commonly. Talk to me about the structure of your fund. I know you at least somewhat teach people how to start their own funds now. Are you doing kind of like the classic 2 and 20? Like, give me the lay of the land of how your fund is actually structured.
Yeah. So, when it comes to the fund, the really cool thing, we have a program, what you're referring to as the private equity fund incubator.
Mm.
And so in the incubators, the way it's structured is that, the incubator itself, people come in and we help them with each step of the process of the fund. So we're helping them put together whatever their strategy is going to be with the fund. And we kind of take them through like, hey, here's historically what private equity is. A lot of people don't realize it actually came from corporate raiders. So the reason that you don't hear, you go back to the 80s and you look at the news and like all these things, and corporate raiders were all the rage. Read a book called Predator's Ball, which is
I was going to mention that book, Mr.
no,
Mezzanine himself. Yeah.
yeah, man, a beautiful, beautiful story that ends with jail time, but still a beautiful story. So, we go through a lot of that. Then we look at, some of our past incubated funds, here's different strategies and those kind of things, and then into the structure and then into raising capital and then launching the fund. And we kind of go through this whole process together. The cool thing has been that in each one of those, we give them the freedom to decide and design exactly what their structure is going to be. But I am participating, and then I also invest in those funds. And so the most recent fund right now, we're now on PEFI 7. So that's the seventh fund that we've launched, and have a really amazing team that is kind of, been going through that process. And we're just at the point of coming up with our fee structure. I believe where they are now is a 8 preferred. So 8% that would go to the investors. That means before any of the GPs get $1. And one of the other things is that every GP is participating as an LP. So it's not, you wouldn't get any of the GP money, but you're still getting your first 8% on the amount that you are an LP. Then after the 8% preferred to the investors, I'm sorry, I'm talking in lingo. So limited partners is the
I was going to ask you to
investors.
explain it for the audience, but I didn't want to interrupt
Yeah, yeah.
you.
Limited partners are the investors, GPs are the general partners, they're the managers.
Yeah.
And so you've got the GPs after the 8%, then there's a 2% catch up. So that basically means like, okay, the next 2% we're going to get. So at least allows us to get kind of a 2%. Typically on a management fee, there may
That's the
be
GP getting the 2%, right?
2%. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So on a lot of funds, there may just be like, if you're looking at, some fund that you invested in, they just may be charging 2% before any money's made. So instead of this, like, okay, you get all 8%, then 2% catch up, and then like a 50-50. There may be some other parts, but then basically like 50-50 of the returns thereafter. So that's what they settled on. And for us, it's really about the upside. I mean, our very first PEFI returned 300%, PEFI one. We've got some
Reasonable,
ladies.
modest sum, beats the index funds a little bit.
I did. I have to give a shout out to my ladies. I was after 4 PEFIs. I was very frustrated with the fact that we didn't have a single lady. So typically we've got 5 people coming through on each one. So we've done 4 of these things and we hadn't had a single female. And so I basically just like went all out, just said, hey, we need females. And we ended up
Yes.
with enough females applying that we had an all lady crew, that all GPs, obviously besides me, all the rest of the GPs are female. So very, very proud of them. And, and they've got one deal that they did that basically is 100% return of the whole fund. So everything else just bonus. It's like they've already got a
Pretty good.
100% Y with one amazing deal. So I have to shout those ladies out.
That's fascinating. And I think the thing that I'm always thinking about, I want to ask a little bit more about the structure, but when it comes to these funds, like they're buying businesses, obviously. I would assume in order for it to work, they would have to
Not
buy,
obviously.
yeah, they would be buying businesses that are big enough to where they can put in like a CEO to run it, or are they running it themselves with these funds?
The most important thing where I was kind of butting in there is the very best deals don't involve buying a business. So
Go
I
on.
think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. One of the biggest misconceptions is that people think, oh, if you're going into private equity, and it was one of the things that was a huge mind shift for me. It's what's led, it's funny. Like I talk about that storage deal. A lot of what led to that storage deal is how I think it was learned by trial and error in how I think about business from a private equity fund manager perspective. So, in a lot of cases, what we're doing is almost putting things together and creating whole new assets. You know, I think one of the things a lot of people think is when you get into micro private equity, the success is going to be based on kind of your pedigree and your history and negotiating good deals. And can you help the business grow, get into the operations and all that. And so, even before I kind of explain how we do the deal, you've got to understand, and you've read The Predator's Ball, man, like you've read that. So,
Great
we
book.
still
Reads like
think
a
about
thriller more so than a piece of journalism, but yeah.
yeah, it's amazing. But when you really think about like we still think about business like the poors. You know what I mean? Like we're not doing business like them. And in most like you look at private equity funds and the most successful in the world, we would think from the poor perspective, because it's just the easiest way to sum it up, from the peasants, are like from
The
our peasant
plebeian, the proletariat.
we think, oh, like business is about operations and hiring good people and running the business
Core
well and improving
values.
the numbers. But when you look at the most successful private equity funds, you would think, okay, if that's what business is about, and private equity funds are buying businesses, the very best funds are going to be the ones where it's run by somebody who is really great at business and has a history of being really great at operating the business, finding the best people, improving margins, getting the marketing plan, all those things that it takes when you buy a business, what the average person when they buy a business focus on. The truth is, all of the biggest, best, baddest, incredible return producing private equity funds are run by investment bankers who have never, ever run a business in their life. Not just, oh, like I ran a bit, never. They're coming from the trading desk, they're coming from investment banking. They understand the world of finance and finance engineering and creative problem solving. And so, one of the things that I love, one of my favorite parts of PEFI, is we take them through a series of case studies where, and a lot of people think, oh, case studies, you're going to be looking at the business where they bought the business and they improved the margins and blah, 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 blah. Some people may even think, oh, you're going to talk about like they're going to come in, they're going to cut the fat and that kind of thing. And the truth is, what I love to talk about is the deals like KB Toys, where you've got deal after deal after deal where these private equity funds have bought a business. The business does terrible. Never Sears and Kmart is another example. They never make a dime. They go into bankruptcy, and somehow the private equity fund ends up making billions in some cases. In the Kmart Sears case, it's literally billions because what they were doing was more on the financial engineering. I'll give you a quick example with Sears and Kmart. What Eddie Lampert did was he created a separate entity that he put the real estate and the leases for Sears and Kmart into that basically became this business worth a couple $1 billion. So, this thing is crashing and burning, but it still makes all of this money through creativity. KB Toy is another example. So there's just all of these case studies where we're basically saying, no, let's not prepare for the best case scenario. Let's figure out when things crash and burn, they don't go as planned, it's all horrible. How do you still make billions in those cases? And then you're ready to be a private equity fund manager.
That's fascinating. So in the Kmart example, it sounds like they kind of spun off those real estate leases into becoming almost like a real estate management company of whoever has those leases, whether it was Kmart or whoever. Like if the Kmart store fell, someone
They
would
they
move that.
created that. Exactly.
Interesting.
But and that's simplifying it too much. I mean, he did a lot, of very creative things. Like one of the, because he even came from the hedge fund world. He didn't come even from private. He didn't come from
The true
even like,
predator.
it was-
Dude.
yeah, like to give you a sense, like at least investment bankers, they're just closer to the actual business. Well, they still never run a business, but it makes more sense that Kohlberg and Kravis, like they still came from investment banking. To come from hedge fund is even crazier, but he ended up running it almost like a hedge fund where he had these different departments. And so it was a
Yeah,
very creative, it would take,
I love it.
it is like an hour long case study call where we're
Yeah,
going through these deals because it is complicated. But I give you that high level story and high level version just so you understand like it's not about what we think running a business is about. It's not about buying a business, trying to improve the profits. It's more about creative thinking and creating assets out of thin air, as crazy as that sounds. So I'll give you one quick example of what we did in Peppy One.
sure.
So Peppy one of the deals that we did was, we had so one of the things that you can do to just take a private equity perspective as opposed to a business owner perspective. One of the things that you can do is just look at your expenses and do the same thing we did on the marketing, where it's like there's just really in the day you shouldn't have expenses. If you're really good from the private, like there's just no reason to have expenses. So we're going through the expenses and we're trying to figure out, okay, what's the next expense that we're going to turn into an asset? And so another simple way to think about it is just like, okay, if I'm going to spend money, the money should be coming to me or at least coming through me. And so we're looking at our portfolio and we only had like four businesses at this point in the portfolio. So we're looking at the portfolio and we're like, okay, bookkeeping, all the businesses, we all know all the businesses have a bookkeeping expense. So we go to a bookkeeping company that's a small bookkeeping company, basically say, hey, we want to do a joint venture with you where we create a bookkeeping company. You're going to do the work. We're going to outsource it. We're going to pay the same amount of money that we're already paying right now. We're going to give you 50% of it. And now we have a bookkeeping company that will be able to sell out of thin air.
Yeah, I've heard of people doing this before. So there's this guy, I'm forgetting his name, much smaller scale than I think what you're talking about, but he did something similar. He had a bookkeeping company, he had an HVAC company, and then he had like two or three other companies. And basically, like one of them was a marketing agency, and all the money just flowed through everything, right? It just kept the valuations going up, even though it was mainly him serving just his own other businesses, right? But it created
Yeah.
like this whole new, like, kind of what you're saying, like an asset out of thin air, which I think is
Yes.
very, very cool.
It is. And so you get to this point where you can end up, every deal that you do, if you set this up the right way, like you're saying, you're increasing all of your other businesses the day that you buy that business.
So let's get into this. So you mentioned some of your students. If an entrepreneur is out there listening to this, they want to do this. This sounds really interesting. And they want to know more how they could be a financial wizard as well. What do you recommend for them? Like, because like they might be thinking like as I said, like you think about hiring a CEO to buy when you're buying these businesses, but with zero track record, would they be better to go down, say, like a path like the SBA path to acquire their first business to show that they have some track record? Or would you recommend like no, just go all in on starting a fund? And what would you recommend for them to do?
Yeah, I think you could have it go either way. If you're somebody who is really interested, the other structure, I basically think either going to do a acquisition holding company or a fund. I think that you want to have one of those two structures.
And real
If
quick, the
you're
whole co is could be many different types of businesses, but the fund would be concentrated on just one type of business typically. Is that about right?
Well, it's more about the structure.
Got
So the fund, basically, you're raising. The biggest difference is the fund, you're raising a fund. And then the acquisition hold co, you're basically buying a business so you could have that first, it's yours. Like you might raise a little bit of capital, but it's based on each entity. And I just think you want to have a portfolio no matter what. Even if you're the person that's saying, hey, I'm going to go out this, I'm going to run this. I think that having a individual business is just too risky, for my taste at least. So I would stay away from just, okay, I'm going to run this single business. So I would either have, I was in HOCO or I would have a fund. I think the deciding factor is if you are or somebody's like, hey, I don't want to deal with other people. I don't want to network with, potential investors. I don't have to network and kind of build this relationship. You've got a lot of stakeholders basically in a fund. And you're still in a business, but employees of the business, investors in the fund, other GPs in your fund, the people that you're buying the businesses from, the people that you want to start early building relationships that you're going to sell the businesses to. So you get rid of some of those if you're the person like, hey, I'm going to have a business, I'm just going to run it forever. And so I think that there's some validity to that. And yeah, going the SBA route is one option there to be able to just buy a deal. And, you've got downsides, but, and I think the biggest is just the personal guarantee.
It's
But
huge.
yeah,
Very
I
big
think
downside.
that's an
Yeah, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I would think with SBA, you can only go up to 5 million, which is it's not like nothing to joke about. That's a big amount of money, but I feel like the bigger the business is, the less fragile it is as well. So it behooves you to figure out a way to start a private fund to go bigger, right? Like, which seems counterintuitive. Like, wouldn't that be more stressful? But I mean, what do you think? Am I right on that? That the bigger the business, the better the buy usually?
Yeah, and I think the other part is, and that's why one of the reasons I say the action HOCO is the bigger the business, the bigger the opportunity to create some of those other assets. If you can have a business where, one of the businesses we're creating in it, because I have HOCOs as well. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll have a HOCO that's under a fund. But, I have a HOCO right now where it's dependent on a lot of hiring. So, one of the things that we're doing is like, hey, let's turn this work that we're having to do. If we've got to do the recruiting, the hiring, da da da, I get hit from people. I know you get hit all the time. People that want VAs or just need to recruit
So from
people.
backlinks.
Yeah, yeah. Like let's just turn this into a business. And so, the bigger the business, the bigger those kinds of opportunities. I've got a client, and this is a more simple example. I've got a client in Houston who is a CPA. He was turning away all of his leads that were coming in for bookkeeping because he does very high end tax planning and tax advisory and that kind of stuff. And it's just amazing work. But he gets bookkeeping leads all the time. And so one of the things that we did with him, he was just turning those leads away. And obviously, I mentioned my experience in Peppy One. So I know how to build a bookkeeping business and then exit. And so what we did with him was we put those bookkeeping leads into an LLC. We hired a bookkeeper, put them in place, and now we'll probably have a few of these here, but we're about to sell the first one. And so that one thing in his business represents, we were calculating it, probably he's been turning away those leads for the last 10 years. And so we're probably going to be able to sell a couple of these bookkeeping firms a year, just taking those leads, putting them in, and doing that kind of thing. We're about to sell the first one. It's going to be $350,000 business. Plan is to do two of those a year. That's 700,000. He thinks we can do four, so I'm being very conservative with the two.
You turn him on. He can't stop now.
I know. But if you look at the last 10 years, like that's $7 million
Yeah.
of just like thrown away money.
That-
And so,
Like, I
go
like
ahead.
this, man, because this exists in so many businesses. So one of my things I think I'm decently okay at is like creative monetization. Like I talk to a lot of our audience about different things that they can do. Like the SEOs, they're always obsessed with affiliate and display ads. When this whole other world of like digital
Mhm.
courses, e-com, stuff like that. But in our own experience with EF, like we don't know if this is going to pan out or not. But we always get hit up by people who are building sites or e-commerce stores in Portuguese or Spanish or German,
Yeah.
right? So
I
we just
saw that
yeah.
announcement.
So I finally got my wish to come true where we sell foreign businesses now because the DD on it is actually not that dissimilar to an English business. Like the backlinks, ironically, are almost always in English anyway, because there's not many leaking opportunities. So typically they're on an English website anyhow. But yeah, that's an example of just something that we used to get up all the time with, and finally, taking some action on it. So I like the
Yeah,
little bookkeeping thing. That's nice. I think it goes back to what you were saying with private equity. There should be no expenses. Like, let's turn this
it's
wasted lead
never be
into a
expensive.
$350,000 business.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, and if you think about that, like there was an opportunity. I don't know if you are taking advantage of it, but there was an opportunity with those leads that were coming in for somebody to say, "Hey, you know what? I'll take those leads and turn that into a business." And if you guys are a $10 million business, $20 million business, that was an opportunity to build a $500,000 business, probably.
Yeah, for sure. So talk to me about, because you mentioned you're selling these smaller kind of assets out of thin air businesses, but what's the normal like hold length of the companies in your fund? I'm just guessing it's different for each fund, but do you have a general
No,
thesis of what you're trying to do?
yeah. So, since the whole idea, there are two goals that we have with Pappy. Number one is to give the person some track record. So that was going to be the other response when you're talking about,
Oh,
not
good. I'm glad you
having,
brought it up because I want to ask about track record again, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. So, somebody who doesn't have a track record, like that is one of the reasons that we do that is that now we're giving them this track record that they'll be able to take to someone else, say, hey, here's my audited track record. I was on the team of GPs. Here are the example deals that we did. Are you interested in doing those kind of deals? I forgot this experience. So that part is really cool. We've actually had a couple people who go through it twice, so that now they've got a couple times that they've done that. The other part, though, is we're working with somebody. The goal is we want them to get the whole experience, but not be kind of running this forever. It's to graduate you to doing something else. So I put a time frame of 2 years on it. So the goal is within the 2 years. We'll put a 2 year time frame on the fund, but typically we're spending the first 6 months just getting everything going, and then we'll have a 2 year time frame after that. But typically we're spending that last 6 months is just exiting final assets and that kind of thing. But beginning to end, it's kind of a 2 year program that can go for an additional 6 months depending on what assets are left in the fund.
That is surprisingly short to me.
Yeah,
I that's like really fast because
now,
most PE firms I see, they usually, they'll have a fund for 3 to 10 years, or like Brent
10.
Beshore, like basically forever, generational. But yeah, so like
Yeah,
that means you must be buying businesses like very quickly to get them like stabilized, and because I'm assuming before that last 6 months of the 2 years is up, you're selling them right to get the liquidation event. Is that right?
yeah,
Wow, that
yeah.
is quick.
But again, I think you're focused on the value being buying the business.
Mm,
And, while we may do a deal, we're only doing a deal because there's low hanging fruit where we're going to be able to create other assets. It's the only way I know to put it. So we're kind of training them on this thinking for those 6 months. So it takes a while for people to start, kind of thinking like that fund manager. For in a lot of deals, we don't really talk about buying businesses. That's probably why, it could be buying a business, but we just talk about doing deals. So it's just about the deal
yeah.
and it's about the equity. It's not about, so I think that's probably, I'm not even used to hearing somebody because I pulled that out of their vocabulary early. So
I'm
each
beyond this
time you
world of buying
say,
businesses at this point.
yeah, each time you say like, oh, if you buy the business at this point, then you guys like, well, no, like that's not even what we're doing. It may be that doing the deal includes buying the business, but we're just doing deals. And all, when I'm talking about all of these random examples, those are examples of doing deals that may not even involve buying the business, but it could involve buying the business. But the buying the business is a very small part. Even when we buy the business, we're looking at that business where basically it's birthing baby assets from that business. There's other things at play. We're buying that because it's going to feed some other business that we already have. There's very little that is just, oh, we're definitely never buying a business because it's a good business.
Love it. This reminds me of this will sound kind of unrelated, but you made me think of it. But the creating assets out of nothing and like also talking about like buying a business not being as big of a thing when you would think that would be the main thing of a private equity fund. But there's this very prolific writer. No one knows his name because he's never had a breakout hit, but his name is Dean Wesley Smith, but he just writes a ton. And he always talks about how, like, yeah, everyone thinks you just need to write a lot of novels, but yeah, you could write a lot of novels, but each novel is like this magic bakery where you could sell all these different pies out of nowhere. And he confuses people when he talks about it, but he's basically talking about, intellectual property rights, like,
Yeah.
German language, Spanish. So that's just like two extra slices of this magic pie that's being created from this book of his, right? And so he sells like movie rights,
Mhm.
options to the movie rights. He said he had
Love it.
one script that never got produced, but paid him 4 grand a month for 3 years. Movie was never made, but that was the magic pie of that book, the slice there. So it
That
reminds
is
me a bit
exactly
of
it.
that.
That was a great example. I
Yeah.
love it. I have to, if you don't mind, shoot me that article or wherever you saw
Sure. Yeah.
that.
He wrote me, I like writing poetry and books. I'm always fascinated by
Yeah.
the author community, but he has this book called Killing the Sacred Cows of Publishing. And his whole thing is like, everyone says that writers are broke and you are all wrong. Basically,
Yeah, you're
like,
doing it right.
he just says that people are lazy and they don't write enough. They don't learn the business. And that's the real reason why they're broke because they don't understand how the business
I love it.
works. But yeah,
I
really,
love
really
it.
good stuff. I'll send you his book. He's a very entertaining read. I think you'd enjoy him. But yeah,
Yeah,
let's,
and that's
yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, that really is it though. It's like that thinking is it. Where you're getting the most, another book is Jay Abraham's Getting Everything You Can Out of What You Have, something like that. But it's just like, man, you already have everything, access to everything you need. It's just you doing the negotiation to get it. If I'm sitting in this room right now, there's just money literally everywhere. I think we feel like, there's just this lack and like, no, like, this floor, the walls, like it's not just the material. Somebody had to get the material, somebody had to get that material out of the earth. That was like one whole business. Somebody else took the raw material and manufactured it, and there were employees and a building and all of this. And then somebody else took the wall from there and had to transport it to Home Depot, and that's a whole transportation and logistics company. It's just like endless money everywhere. And I think that's probably one of the coolest parts to just the equity deals and private equity. I think once you really get it, it's almost like the scene in the Matrix where instead of seeing code everywhere, you just see dollars and money. It's just like everywhere you look, it's like, oh, here's an opportunity to do a deal here. Here's another opportunity. Because the other part of this is a lot of those assets, we talked about this last time. You have the hard assets and the soft assets. And for the most part, when we're talking about these soft assets, we're talking about for you guys, the non English assets that were coming in, like that is money that they were throwing away for 20 years. When I'm talking about
Yeah.
my bookkeeping thing, it's like that's money. So everybody with these soft assets, and that's really what the author is saying. It's like, oh, it's not that you're not making money. When you're generating this content, you're literally making money. The problem is you're not kind of turning it from making the money into the money entering your bank account. And so what's happening is you have these soft assets that you could turn into because it's assets, but you could turn it into money in your bank account. But most companies are not using these intangible assets. And so that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
If I were going to say how to correct you from saying buying businesses, the biggest thing, even if we happen to buy a business, like that's so low, where it's just a part of kind of the deal. Mostly what we're doing is I'm turning them into experts at turning intangible assets into assets that can put money into our fund's bank account.
Yeah, I like that, man. And I think that's like obviously I made the same mistake of thinking about just buying a business, but it makes a lot of sense. Like there's people I know that run big marketing agencies that have like hundreds of clients in like one same niche. And the thing that they never think about is like all the data they have on that niche. Like you say it was a real estate agents, right? They have hundreds of them. They could start a Facebook group or like a premium group, like 10, 20 bucks a month, and then out of those hundreds of real estate agents maybe like 50 join up or in love with the community, right? Like there's all sorts of different ways you can make money from this audience, which is why I often tell people like the most important part of a business is obviously the profit, but the second most important part is the data. Like the data could be argued is more important because if you use the
Yeah,
data right, you're going to make a lot more profit. So
exactly.
yeah, this is
Exactly.
why I always tell my affiliate friends you need to start like courses or something where you get the actual data of the customer, right? Because there's just so much more you can do with it. I know we're over an hour, but there's a couple more questions I want to ask you. One of the big ones was if an entrepreneur wanted to start their own fund, to start doing what you're doing and learning about it, how would you recommend them to really go and get those investors? Like, do they just like send a cold email? Are they like knocking on their villa in Greece? Like, let me in. Like, how are they finding the investors and starting these kind of conversations and winning the investors over to invest with them?
I think the really cool thing today is that it's easier than ever before. If you're just talking about from the perspective of raising capital, I think the hack now is being able to build a network online. So there are a couple of things that I start to do. So the first thing is you kind of got to identify what platforms you want to go after and who you want to target to start building a relationship with. Now, the most obvious place is LinkedIn, but I also think Twitter is cool. So, I use the Twitter DM and hardly ever tweet. I may be different because I've got a lot of other things in other places, but I think LinkedIn and Twitter are just really cool places to be able to connect with people. And then obviously the third thing is coming up with who is your target. I think in a time where everybody's trying to build as big an audience as possible, and basically you can envision it as like going super super wide. So in a time where everybody's trying to go super super wide, I think there is a tremendous value in going deep with a few people and having like just a deep relationship and really investing in that long term and not being transactional. Like, I don't care if you don't invest in whatever fund it is, because the most important thing is doing the work. So even if it's just a really tiny fund and we do 300%, then hey, you missed out. So my goal, like I want to be at a place where, especially right now, I think there's so much, and we do obviously a ton of training on raising capital, but a lot of it is more psychological than anything else. Number one, if you think that raising capital is this difficult thing, then it will be because it doesn't make sense that it would be difficult. Money is just like everybody has some amount of money, first of all. Even a homeless person is like got some amount of money. So money is literally just everywhere. And it's losing value by the second. Now that's always been the case, but now we're in an economy where it's nuts how much it's losing value. So you got this thing that is literally becoming worth less and less minute by minute, second by second. And you're telling that person like, hey, that thing that's like disappearing, like if you've got that in your pocket or you got this in your bank account, it's literally disappearing. I'm going to help it stay there. Like, you're literally doing them a favor. So with every investor that I work, it's like, yo, I'm doing you a favor. And if you don't appreciate me offering you this favor, then great. Like, hey, you saved me from having to do you the favor. The other part is understanding that the cash that you're raising, people get excited about raising capital. There's just it's too much to cover here, but there's a lot here. Last point on this, and I'll talk a little bit about just building the relationship. But people get excited about raising capital. Even when I see somebody that's raising capital for my business and they're like celebrating, like, oh, we just raised this amount of money. It's like, that's no different than a loan. Like what you're looking at
I'm so
is,
glad you said that because I feel the
yeah,
same way about that.
yeah, like this is a liability on your balance sheet. You're
Not only
literally
is it a loan, but you also own less of your business now. Congratulations.
But and you own less of it, but you literally owe these people this money back. Like they didn't give you that money with the expectation that you just gave them some equity. You have less equity now, so you paying for it twice, right? You're now going to have less equity by taking this money, and now you've got to figure out how to get them their money back plus a return.
Yep.
So to celebrate that is like, wait a minute, you're just celebrating that now you got to do more work. Whatever work you had to do before, you've got to do more in order to get them their money back with a return and still have some for you.
I see the private
Um,
equity people like, yes, keep thinking this is a great thing. Take more money.
yeah, exactly,
This is the way the
exactly.
plebeian thinks.
So real quick, when we're building what we build for investors, basically it's just a marketing funnel. That's the biggest mistake that a lot of people make. I think, it comes down to building a marketing funnel that you're taking investors through the same way you would any other product. And we have some specific ways that we do that and some psychological triggers, and then we get to the end, and it's almost like it's literally a funnel. So you're kind of getting through people and kind of pack a lot of people at the top, and you're taking them through this process, and you're building rapport, you're educating them, you're kind of showing them the opportunity, and then presenting at the end. So now we've gotten to the point where that is kind of a systematic process that we take potential investors through.
That's awesome, man. We'll wrap up this podcast with one more question. It's kind of a two for one question, but for an entrepreneur that's looking to do this, what kind of foundations would you recommend that they have? So let's say there's an entrepreneur who is really good at sales or really good at marketing. Would you say
Mm.
like wait before you do this, you really need to learn some of this like financial wizardry stuff we were talking about before? And the second part of that question is what are the common mistakes you see people make when they're trying to go out and create this fund?
So the really cool thing is, if you're starting from scratch right now, your main goal is going to be creative and to put in the hustle. But the really great thing, like we talked about before, if you're just literally paying cash for a really great business, even if you're somebody, you're somebody who doesn't have any experience, I think that going this route is so much better for you. Because if you're willing to learn even just the simple things, not the financial industry, just hey, how to build an investor funnel, how do I take people through that process and raise capital. And then all you do is instead of having to go out and try to get, because even SBA now puts you at a huge disadvantage. I mean, what percentage of y'all's deals do y'all get SBA on?
A whopping 0%.
And that's out of how many deals a
Yeah,
year?
we've never been able to make an SBA work. They take forever for one, and the other thing
Yeah,
too is, like, you can't really make, like I mean, you can kind of make a deal structure, but, I mean, it's, like,
yeah.
always, like,
But
what, like,
it just doesn't
5%
happen.
equity, 5% seller note, the rest SBA, like, that's about as creative as you can get usually with
But that's out of how many deals are y'all
Yeah,
closing a year?
hundred
Which you
out
which
of
you
hundreds of
estimate?
deals, we've never done a single
Hundreds,
SBA.
hundreds of deals every year, decade, and never close one. And so what happens is people all the time are coming to y'all and they want to get a deal, want to do a deal.
Oh,
That's the
for
same thing
sure.
that I see. People want to do it. And so this just puts you at a huge advantage. What that means is that the other people are coming up with ways to get the cash. So you're not going to get a top 1% deal, even if you're SBA. So raising the fund allows you to get one of those very best deals. Even if you're getting the very best deal without you're going to have some earnout. You're going to have some terms. Even if it was without any of that, you're going to get a 35, 40% ROI
Yeah.
on the deal. And so this, for the average person that, like we said, the money is disappearing, it's -9%, and you're able to give them a return of 30%, 25%, whatever. That was me at the very beginning. It wasn't until I learned. So you're still like, I had investors that were thrilled with some of those early funds at 25%. It was just with the experience. Now we can do the outrageous numbers like everyone, we're doing 300%. You know what I mean? Like that's when it gets really crazy. But the truth is, you're doing yourself a favor because you're going to get a better deal, and you're doing the investors a favor because now, collectively with everybody, you're able to do a better deal, and they're able to get a really great return. So I think even if you're just the basic business buyer, you should be doing it through a fund structure. And then you add the tax benefits and the track record and it's everything else. It just is no comparison. I wish that I could go back 20 years to the first decade of my career doing deals, and everything would be through a fund.
This reminds me of a few years ago when I was still relatively new at EF. We had just sold our biggest deal, which was 1.9 million at the time. And yeah, I was at this club in Bangkok. We were kind of like me and my buddy were celebrating the fact that we did this deal because it took us forever to sell. It took us like 8 months to sell it. We had no idea what we were doing back then. And I met this Taiwanese guy. He asked me what I did. I told him like, "Oh, I kind of work in private equity as well." Like, "Oh, cool. What was?" So he asked me like, "What was our biggest deal?" Like, "Yeah, 2.9 million." He's like, "Ah." He started laughing. Like, I guess I'm buying the drinks.
Yeah, yeah. Drinks on me, poor
Yeah,
man.
like this M&A guy over here with this big $2 million deal.
Private equity.
I
It's
just
like,
want
I would
to
keep that private in the future.
yeah, keep that private. Yeah, hey, let's do free drinks, so I'll have to use that card again next time I see him.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's hilarious, man. Do you have any more parting pieces of wisdom for people who want to
No,
do
I,
this?
I'm glad that I know last time we didn't get to, go through everything that we did this time. So, I feel like, man, I enjoyed the conversation. Like I said at the beginning, we were able to get into some of the deep stuff that, in other interviews, are just nobody gets to talk about, or even just is thinking at that point. So I love this. My pleasure being here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, you're always welcome back on, man. If people wanted to check out your program, I guess we'll wrap it up. Give us some details about the program. Like, is it like you only let in a few people at a time, or is it more like a course?
Yeah.
Like tell us about it.
Yeah. So if they're interested in that, we'll have the next group coming up pretty soon. It's really just based on making sure that the previous group is running well before, so it's not like a certain amount of time.
Mm.
But we've got Peppy 7 right now. They're going through that. I do have, for the folks that want to go the acquisition holding company route, where you're kind of using the same strategies, but instead of it being in a fund, it's in a hold co. And you can learn about that. And probably the best place to go is just to go to soloconglomerate.com. I've got a free kind of 6-day masterclass where every day I send you an email. It's got an assignment in it, and then it culminates with a video training and all of that. But over the course of those 6 days, you're building the foundation of your acquisition holdco. So that's a great place to start.
Awesome, man. We'll put all those links in the show notes down below. And thanks for coming on, Ace. Always a pleasure, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace, or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.